You feel overwhelmed by life's constant pressures, deadlines crushing down, relationships falling apart, and that gnawing anxiety that follows you everywhere. Every setback shakes your confidence and disrupts your peace of mind while you watch others maintain their composure under similar or worse circumstances. I am Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who maintained inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives. The Stoic secrets I'll share will give you a fortress of calm that no external pressure can penetrate, using the same principles that sustained me through plagues, wars, and the burden of absolute power. These are the timeless truths that transformed a struggling young man into an unshakable leader, wisdom that works just as powerfully in today's chaotic world as it did in ancient Rome. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. Want to see how far the need for inner strength has spread? When I was 17, I thought power meant freedom. I watched from the sidelines as my adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, ruled the greatest empire the world had ever known, and I believed that someday, when the purple cloak fell upon my shoulders, I would finally be free to live as I chose. How wrong I was. The weight of expectation began crushing me long before I ever wore the imperial diadem. Every decision I made was scrutinized, every word analyzed for weakness or strength. The senators watched me with calculating eyes, measuring whether this young philosopher had the steel necessary to command legions. My own advisors questioned whether a man who spent his mornings reading Epictetus could handle the brutal realities of governance. I remember the sleepless nights, pacing the marble floors of my chambers, feeling the crushing weight of a destiny I had never chosen. The empire stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, 60 million souls looking to Rome for protection, justice, and leadership. And someday, all of that responsibility would rest on my shoulders alone. The thought terrified me, but it was in those dark hours of doubt that I first discovered the truth that would sustain me through everything that followed. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in my father's study. He was dying, we all knew it, and his once powerful frame had withered to almost nothing. Yet when he looked up from his papers, his eyes held a peace I had never seen before. "Marcus," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you're afraid of the crown." I couldn't lie to him. "Yes, Father. How can I possibly bear what you have carried?" He smiled then, and handed me a piece of parchment, a letter he had been writing. "Read this when I am gone," he said. "But know this now, the crown has no weight at all. It is only our thoughts about the crown that crush us." I didn't understand. Then, how could a piece of metal and cloth, symbols of unlimited power, have no weight? How could the responsibility for 60 million lives be anything but crushing? 3 months later, as I knelt beside his deathbed, I finally understood. Antoninus Pius drew his last breath with the same serene expression he had worn in life. Number, fear, no regret, no desperate clinging to power. In that moment, I realized that the weight I had been carrying was not the crown at all, it was my resistance to it. That night, alone in my chambers, I opened his letter. The words were simple, but they changed everything. "My son, you cannot control whether you become emperor, but you can control what kind of man wears the crown. You cannot control the challenges that will come, but you can control how you meet them. The crown weighs nothing, your character that is everything." It was my first real lesson in what the Stoics call the fundamental principle, the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. The young man who had spent months agonizing over responsibilities he couldn't avoid had been wasting his energy on things completely outside his control. I couldn't choose whether to be emperor, but I could choose who I would be as emperor. This realization didn't make the challenges disappear. They would multiply 1,000-fold in the years to come. but it gave me something infinitely more valuable than an easier path. It gave me the foundation for an unshakable mind. When the Antonine Plague swept through the empire, when trusted generals betrayed me, when barbarian tribes pressed against our borders, I would remember that night and my father's simple wisdom. The external circumstances had no power over my inner peace, unless I gave them that power. This was the first Stoic secret they don't want you to know. True strength isn't about controlling your circumstances. It's about controlling your responses to them. The year was 165 AD, and death walked through Rome like a conquering army. The Antonine Plague had arrived with our returning legions from the eastern campaigns, and within months it spread through every corner of the empire. Bodies lined the streets of the capital, and the smoke from funeral pyres darkened the sky for weeks on end. I had been emperor for only 4 years, still learning to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics, when this invisible enemy brought Rome to its knees. Nothing in my philosophical training had prepared me for the reality of watching an empire die, one person at a time. The reports that reached my desk each morning were staggering. In some cities, 1/3 of the population had perished. Trade routes collapsed. Legions were decimated not by barbarian swords, but by an enemy they couldn't see or fight. My advisors urged me to flee Rome, to establish the imperial court in some distant, uncontaminated province. The practical choice was obvious: preserve the emperor, preserve the empire. But I couldn't leave. Not when my people were suffering. Not when senators were abandoning their duties and fleeing to their country estates. Someone had to stay and hold the center together, even if that someone might die in the process. It was during those dark months that I learned the most profound Stoic lesson of my life: the power of memento mori, remembering death, not as a morbid obsession, but as the ultimate teacher of what truly matters. I remember walking through the makeshift hospitals that had been established in the Forum Romanum. The stench was overwhelming, the sounds of suffering almost unbearable. I watched a young mother hold her dying child, her face a mask of grief that would haunt my dreams for years. An old senator, who had once commanded respect through his wealth and connections, lay dying on a simple cot, indistinguishable from the poorest citizen beside him. In that moment, I understood something that all my years of study hadn't taught me. Death is the great equalizer, and it renders most of our daily anxieties absurd. The senator's political maneuvering meant nothing now. The mother's social status couldn't save her child. The merchant's accumulated wealth was powerless against this invisible enemy. But I also saw something extraordinary. I watched physicians, who could have fled instead, choose to stay and tend the sick, knowing they might contract the disease themselves. I saw citizens sharing their meager food with strangers. I witnessed slaves caring for their masters with the same devotion they had always shown. Even as social order collapsed around them, the plague stripped away all pretense, all the artificial distinctions that usually divide us, and revealed what the Stoics had always taught. Virtue is the only thing that truly matters. Courage, justice, compassion, wisdom, these remained when everything else crumbled. Each morning, I began practicing what would become a daily ritual for the rest of my life. I would look in my bronze mirror and remind myself, you could die today, not to create fear, but to create clarity. If this were my last day, what would actually matter? The petty political squabble that had consumed my attention yesterday, the slight from a senator that had bruised my ego, the delayed trade agreements that had frustrated my morning, all of it seemed suddenly insignificant when viewed through the lens of mortality. This daily confrontation with death didn't make me morbid, it made me free. Free from the 1,000 small tyrannies that usually govern our days. Free from the desperate need for others' approval. Free from the illusion that I could control outcomes rather than just my responses to them. The plague taught me that we spend most of our lives afraid of the wrong things. We fear embarrassment more than cowardice, poverty more than moral compromise, looking foolish more than being genuinely helpful. But when death draws near, these fears reveal themselves as the shadows. They always were. I began to see every morning as a gift, not because I might die that day, but because I was alive to choose how to spend it. Every conversation became an opportunity to practice wisdom or kindness. Every challenge became training for my character. Every moment of peace became something to savor rather than take for granted. The plague eventually passed, but the lesson remained. Death is not the enemy of life. It's the teacher that shows us how to live. When you truly accept that your time is limited, you stop wasting it on things that don't matter and start investing it in things that do. This is the second Stoic secret. Memento mori isn't about becoming obsessed with death. It's about becoming fully alive. ****. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from the desperate ride from Syria. His words shattered what I had believed about loyalty, friendship, and human nature in a single, devastating moment. Caesar Avidius Cassius has declared himself emperor. He claims you are dead. I stared at the blood-stained parchment in my hands, a forged report of my death that had convinced my most trusted general to seize power. Cassius, who had served Rome faithfully for decades, who had shared meals at my table, who had sworn sacred oaths of loyalty, had betrayed not just me, but the very idea of honor itself. The rage that surged through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My hands trembled as I held the false proclamation. My advisors immediately began planning military response. Legions remained loyal. How quickly we could march east. What punishment would be fitting for such treachery? The Senate demanded immediate action. The people expected swift vengeance. But as I sat alone in my study that night, staring at Cassius's proclamation, I realized this betrayal was offering me something far more valuable than an opportunity for revenge. It was offering me a chance to practice the most difficult Stoic principle of all, understanding that other people's actions reveal their character, not yours. I had spent months torturing myself with questions that had no answers. How could I have been so blind? What signs had I missed? How could someone I trusted completely turn against me so easily? I was drowning in the illusion that somehow his betrayal was a reflection of my failure as a judge of character. Then I remembered the words of Epictetus. When someone speaks badly of you, do not defend yourself against the falsehood, but reply, "You evidently don't know the rest of my faults, or you would have mentioned them as well." The joke wasn't about accepting false accusations, it was about understanding that other people's opinions and actions spring from their own inner world, not from objective reality about you. Cassius' betrayal told me nothing about my worthiness as an emperor or friend. It told me everything about the fear, ambition, and moral weakness that lived in his heart. He had acted not because I had failed him, but because he had failed himself. When he heard the false report of my death, instead of grieving for a friend or ensuring a smooth transition of power, he saw opportunity. That choice revealed who he truly was. This understanding didn't eliminate the pain of betrayal, but it transformed it. Instead of the sharp, personal wound of rejection, it became the more distant sadness of watching someone destroy themselves through their own choices. I could mourn the friend I thought I knew while accepting the reality of the man he had always been. The Stoic response wasn't to pretend the betrayal didn't hurt, or to immediately forgive and forget. It was to respond from my own character rather than react from my wounded emotions. What kind of emperor did I want to be? What kind of man? Cassius's choices could not answer those questions. Only mine could. When word came 3 months later that Cassius had been assassinated by his own officers upon learning I was still alive, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. He had destroyed himself through his own ambition, just as surely as if he had fallen on his sword. His betrayal had freed me from the illusion that I could control others' loyalty through my own virtue. People will always act according to their own nature, their own fears, their own understanding of the world. My job was not to ensure their loyalty through perfect leadership, an impossible task, but to remain worthy of loyalty regardless of whether it was returned. This is the third Stoic secret. Other people's betrayal reveals their character, not yours. Respond from your own virtue, not their vice. Asterisk, asterisk, there is a place inside your mind where no army can march, no betrayer can enter, and no plague can spread. The Stoics call it the inner citadel, and it took me years of building to understand its true power. It's not a place you retreat to escape the world. It's a fortress from which you engage with the world on your own terms. I began constructing this citadel without realizing it. During those sleepless nights when the weight of empire pressed down on me like a physical burden, every morning brought new crises: barbarian incursions along the Danube, grain shortages in Egypt, political intrigue in the Senate, religious conflicts in the provinces. The demands were endless, the pressures relentless. My physical body could be anywhere in the palace dealing with senators, on campaign along hostile borders, or reviewing endless reports that determined the fate of millions. But I learned to create a space within my mind that remained untouched by the chaos surrounding me, a place where I could always return to find peace and clarity. The construction began with a simple practice. I started during the plague years. Each dawn, before the demands of the day could claim me, I would sit in silence and remind myself of fundamental truths. I am a human being. I will face opposition, ingratitude, and conflict today. People will act according to their own understanding, not mine. I cannot control their actions, only my responses. This wasn't passive resignation, it was active preparation. By acknowledging what I could not control, I was freeing my energy to focus entirely on what I could: my thoughts, my choices, my character, my responses. The citadel wasn't built from denial of difficulty, but from clear-eyed acceptance of reality. The walls of this inner fortress were constructed from daily practices that gradually became second nature. When someone criticized my policies unjustly, instead of immediately defending myself, I would pause and ask, is there truth in this criticism I can learn from? If not, I would let the words pass through me like wind through an open window. Their opinion could not diminish me unless I gave it that power. When facing impossible decisions, where every choice would bring suffering to someone, I would retreat to this inner space and ask, what would virtue do here? Not what would be popular, not what would be expedient, but what would be just, courageous, temperate, and wise. The answer wasn't always clear, but the process of asking from this centered place always provided clarity. The citadel became my refuge during the Germanic campaigns. When we spent months in muddy camps along the Danube, fighting battles that seemed to solve nothing, while my body endured the discomfort of military life and my mind dealt with tactical decisions, there was a part of me that remained untouched by the hardship. I had learned to separate my essential self from my circumstances. Remember one particularly bitter winter when supplies were running low and morale was breaking. Officers came to me with complaints, soldiers grumbled about the endless conflict, and reports from Rome brought news of political machinations I couldn't address from the frontier. In my tent that night, surrounded by maps and dispatches, I felt the familiar pull toward frustration and despair. But then I withdrew to my inner citadel. Here, in this space I had spent years constructing, I reminded myself, this campaign would end as all things end. The discomfort was temporary, but how I bore it would shape my character permanently. The soldiers' morale was important, but my own inner peace was the foundation from which all my leadership flowed. From this centered place, I could see the situation clearly. My men needed reassurance, not from false promises about easy victory, but from genuine confidence that we would endure whatever came. I could provide that confidence only if I had first found it within myself. The true power of the inner citadel wasn't that it made external problems disappear. They remained as challenging as ever. Its power was that it gave me a place to stand. That was unshakable, regardless of the storms raging around me. From this stable foundation, I could respond to any crisis with wisdom rather than react with emotion. Every evening, I would review the day from this inner sanctuary. What had I handled well? Where had I allowed external circumstances to disturb my peace? What could I learn from the day's challenges? This wasn't self-criticism, but self-strengthening, adding another stone to the citadel's walls. Over time, I discovered that this inner fortress wasn't a place of isolation, but of connection. When I was centered in my own peace, I could be fully present for others. When I wasn't defending my ego or managing my anxieties, I had unlimited energy for serving the common good. This is the fourth Stoic secret. Build an inner citadel through daily practice, and no external circumstances can steal your peace. I kept a golden goblet in my private chambers, a masterpiece of craftsmanship gifted by the people of Alexandria, encrusted with precious stones and worth more than most citizens would see in a lifetime. It was beautiful, valuable, and completely unnecessary. One morning, I deliberately threw it against the marble wall and watched it shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces. My chamberlain, who witnessed this act, looked at me as though I had lost my mind. "Caesar, that goblet was priceless," he stammered. I swept up the fragments with my own hands and replied, "Exactly. And now it has taught me the most valuable lesson of all. This wasn't madness, it was practice." I was training myself in what the Stoics call the discipline of desire, the most liberating and most difficult of all philosophical exercises. We suffer not because we lack things, but because we want things we don't have and fear losing things we do have. The goblet was my teacher in the art of non-attachment. For years, I had observed how desire enslaved even the most powerful people in Rome. Senators who had everything still schemed for more influence. Wealthy merchants who could buy anything still burned with envy over their competitors' success. Even I, with the resources of an empire at my disposal, had felt the gnawing hunger for things beyond my reach, for a simple life, for time with my family, for the respect of those who would never be satisfied with any emperor. The discipline of desire doesn't mean becoming indifferent to everything or living without preferences. It means learning to want what you have and accepting what you cannot have. It means finding contentment in the present reality rather than constantly yearning for a different one. I began practicing this discipline in small ways. When my favorite wine was unavailable, instead of sending servants across the city to find it, I would drink whatever was served and find something to appreciate about it. When rain disrupted my plans for a morning walk in the gardens, instead of cursing the weather, I would find pleasure in listening to the drops against the windows of my study. These weren't mere exercises in positive thinking. They were training in freedom. Every time I chose contentment over complaint, acceptance over resistance, I was loosening the chains that tied my peace of mind to external circumstances. The real test came during the years when my health began to fail. The stomach pains that would plague my later years started as occasional discomfort, but gradually became a constant companion. I watched other men in similar situations become bitter, raging against the unfairness of their condition, desperately seeking cures that didn't exist. I chose a different path. Instead of fighting against the pain, I practiced loving what was happening to me, what the Stoics call amor fati, loving your fate. This didn't mean pretending to enjoy suffering, but accepting it as part of the human experience and looking for what it could teach me. My illness taught me compassion for others who suffered. It reminded me daily of the impermanence of all things, including my own life. It forced me to prioritize what truly mattered and let go of everything else. In a strange way, the pain became a gift, not despite the fact that it hurt, but because of what the hurt taught me about resilience and acceptance. I learned to apply this same principle to every aspect of imperial life. When the Senate passed legislation I thought unwise, instead of fuming about their short-sightedness, I would ask, how can I work within this reality to serve the common good? When barbarian tribes raided our borders, instead of raging about their ingratitude for Roman peace, I would focus on the most effective response to protect our citizens. This discipline extended even to my relationships. I stopped expecting people to meet my standards of behavior and started accepting them as they were. When senators flattered me insincerely, I neither believed the flattery nor resented the insincerity. I simply recognized it as their way of navigating their world. When my own son Commodus showed no interest in philosophy, instead of pushing him toward my values, I accepted his nature and looked for other ways to connect with him. The most profound application came in facing my own mortality. Instead of clinging desperately to life or raging against the approach of death, I practiced wanting whatever length of time I was given. Whether I lived another day or another decade, I would use that time well. This acceptance didn't make me passive, it made me purposeful. When you're not wasting energy fighting reality, you have tremendous power to shape your response to it. The discipline of desire isn't about having no preferences. It's about holding preferences lightly. Want things if they come, release them gracefully when they go, and find your contentment in the choice to respond with virtue regardless of what happens. This is the fifth Stoic secret. Peace comes not from getting what you want, but from wanting what you have and accepting what you cannot change. Asterisk, asterisk, I have buried 13 of my children. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. 13. Each death was a universe of grief, a catastrophe that could have shattered any parent's will to continue living. Yet each loss also became a profound teacher in the art of living fully. My son Lucius Verus died when he was only 7 years old. I remember holding his small, still body and feeling as though the gods had torn out a piece of my soul. The pain was so intense that I understood, for the first time, why some parents never recover from such losses. The temptation to rage against fate, to demand answers from an indifferent universe, was overwhelming. But in that moment of ultimate grief, I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. Instead of allowing sorrow to destroy me, I would let it teach me. Lucius's death became my most demanding philosophy teacher, instructing me in lessons no book could provide. The first lesson was the absolute certainty of impermanence. Everything we love, every person, every moment of joy, every season of peace is borrowed time. This isn't a curse. It's the fundamental condition of existence. Once I truly accepted this, I stopped taking any moment with my remaining children for granted. Every conversation became precious because I knew it might be our last. When my daughter Domitia Faustina died in infancy, I learned that grief and gratitude could coexist. Yes, I mourned the future we would never share, the woman she would never become. But I also felt profound gratitude for the brief time she had been mine, for the joy she had brought even in her short life, for the way her existence had expanded my capacity for love. Each subsequent lesson, there would be many more, deepened these lessons. I learned that death doesn't diminish love, it concentrates it. I learned that mourning is not weakness but the price we pay for having been fortunate enough to love deeply. I learned that the anticipation of loss can paralyze us, but the acceptance of loss can liberate us to love more fully while we can. The deaths of my children taught me to view my own mortality differently as well. If these innocent souls, who had done no harm to anyone, could be called from this world without warning, how could I expect to be exempt from the same fate? This wasn't a terrifying realization, it was a clarifying one. I began each day by acknowledging that it might be my last, not in a morbid way, but as a practice of presence and priority. If I only had today, how would I spend it? What would matter? What petty concerns would reveal themselves as meaningless? This daily meditation on mortality became the foundation for a life lived with intention. Death taught me that our suffering comes not from loss itself, but from our resistance to loss. When we cling desperately to what is temporary by nature, we guarantee our own torment. When we hold everything lightly, our possessions, our positions, our relationships, even our own lives, we can experience them fully without the anxiety of losing them. The funeral mask I kept of my son Lucius served as a daily reminder of these truths. Some visitors found it morbid, but to me it was liberation. Looking at that small face each morning reminded me that this day, whatever challenges it brought, was a gift. My work as emperor, my relationships with family and friends, my opportunity to serve the common good, all of it was temporary and therefore precious. This perspective transformed how I governed as well. Knowing that my reign would end, I focused on building institutions and establishing principles that would outlast me rather than monuments to my own glory. Knowing that I would face judgment not from history but from my own conscience, I chose virtue over popularity, justice over expedience. Death became my counselor in every important decision. When facing difficult choices, I would ask, how will this matter when I'm dying? What would I wish I had done? The answers always pointed toward courage, compassion, and integrity, never toward the comfortable compromises that political life constantly offered. This is the sixth Stoic secret. Embrace death as your teacher, and it will show you how to truly live. Asterisk, asterisk. The battle plan spread across my campaign table showed a dire situation. The Germanic tribes had united against us in unprecedented numbers. Our supply lines were stretched thin, and winter was approaching faster than our military objectives could be achieved. My generals argued over tactics, while reports of setbacks arrived hourly. The weight of decision pressed down on me like a physical burden. Then I remembered the most liberating principle in all of Stoic philosophy, the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. This simple distinction, which I had first learned from my father's deathbed letter, became the key to unshakable peace in the midst of any storm. I took a piece of charcoal and drew a line down the center of a blank parchment. On one side, I wrote up to me, on the other, not up to me. Then I began sorting every aspect of our military situation into these two categories. Not up to me, the number of enemy warriors, the weather, the loyalty of allied tribes, the speed of our supply wagons, the outcome of tomorrow's battle. The list was long and sobering. So much of what we typically worry about and spend our energy trying to control falls into this category of things completely outside our influence. Up to me. My decisions about troop deployment, my response to setbacks, my attitude toward hardship, my example to the men, my preparation for various contingencies, my courage in the face of uncertainty. This list was shorter but far more powerful, because these were things I could actually influence. The revelation was immediate and profound. I had been exhausting myself trying to control outcomes that were fundamentally beyond my power, while neglecting the things that were entirely within my control. I couldn't guarantee victory, but I could guarantee that we would fight with wisdom, courage, and honor. I couldn't control whether the enemy would attack at dawn, but I could control whether we would be ready if they did. This principle transformed not just my military leadership, but every aspect of my life. In the Senate, I stopped trying to control senators' votes and focused instead on presenting the truth clearly and persuasively. I couldn't make them choose wisdom, but I could ensure they had access to it. The frustration that had plagued my early political career evaporated when I stopped taking responsibility for other people's decisions and focused entirely on making my own decisions worthy of respect. With my family, the dichotomy of control brought both peace and deeper connection. I couldn't control whether my children would embrace philosophy or choose different paths, but I could control the example I set and the love I offered. When my son Commodus showed interest in gladiatorial combat rather than governance, instead of fighting his nature, I focused on teaching him honor and discipline within his chosen pursuits. The most profound application came in facing the uncertainties that plague every human life. I couldn't control whether I would live to see my next birthday, but I could control how I lived each day I was given. I couldn't control whether the empire would prosper after my death, but I could control the systems and principles I left behind. I couldn't control how history would judge me, but I could control whether my conscience would approve of my choices. This understanding didn't eliminate challenges. It eliminated the additional suffering we create by fighting against reality. When Germanic tribes raided our borders, instead of raging about their ingratitude or questioning why such things happen to good empires, I simply focused on the most effective response. The attack was not up to me. My preparation and reaction were entirely up to me. In personal relationships, this principle became a source of tremendous freedom. I stopped trying to control how others perceived me and focused instead on being worthy of their respect. I stopped demanding that people meet my expectations and started accepting them as they were while maintaining my own standards. The energy I had previously wasted trying to manage others' opinions became available for actually serving them. Even my health, which deteriorated significantly in my later years, became an opportunity to practice this principle. The progression of my illness was not up to me. How I bore it was entirely up to me. I could choose to meet physical suffering with mental equanimity, to use limitation as a teacher of what truly mattered. The dichotomy of control revealed that most of our anxiety comes from trying to control things that are not up to us, while neglecting things that are. We worry about others' opinions while neglecting our own character. We stress about uncertain outcomes while failing to prepare thoroughly. We fear events that may never happen while missing opportunities to respond skillfully to events that are happening right now. When you truly internalize this principle, a remarkable transformation occurs. You become simultaneously more relaxed and more effective. Relaxed because you're no longer fighting battles you cannot win. More effective because all your energy is focused on areas where you actually have influence. This is the seventh Stoic secret. Focus completely on what is up to you and let go of everything else. I once witnessed a slave who possessed more genuine wealth than many senators. His name was Epaphroditus, and he served in the palace kitchens. He had no money, no property, no political influence, and no freedom to leave. Yet when I observed him working, I saw something that all the gold in the imperial treasury could not buy: unshakable dignity. Epaphroditus approached every task, whether preparing a simple meal or cleaning the floors, with the same careful attention and quiet pride. He treated everyone, from fellow slaves to visiting dignitaries, with consistent respect. When other servants gossiped or complained, he remained focused on his work. When opportunities arose to shirk duties or take shortcuts, he chose excellence. Instead, his chains could bind his body, but nothing could touch the nobility of his character. In that moment, I understood what the Stoics mean when they say virtue is the only true good. It's the only thing that can never be taken from you, the only possession that enriches rather than enslaves. Most people spend their lives chasing what the Stoics call indifferent things: wealth, reputation, pleasure, external success. These aren't evil, but they're not truly good either, because they can be lost through circumstances beyond our control. You can be wealthy today and poor tomorrow. You can be celebrated today and forgotten tomorrow. You can be healthy today and sick tomorrow. But virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline remains yours, regardless of what fortune brings. I learned this lesson repeatedly throughout my reign. I watched wealthy merchants lose their fortunes overnight and become bitter, angry men whose true poverty was revealed when their external riches disappeared. I saw senators who had built their identity on political power become desperate and scheming when that power was threatened. I observed citizens who based their happiness on physical pleasure become miserable when age or illness limited their indulgences. But I also witnessed the opposite, people who remained unshaken regardless of external circumstances because they had built their lives on virtue. A general who lost a crucial battle but maintained his honor. A citizen who faced financial ruin but refused to compromise his integrity. A mother who buried her children but continued to serve others with compassion. The four cardinal virtues became my daily companions and guides. Wisdom, the ability to navigate complex situations with clear thinking and sound judgment. Justice, treating others fairly and working for the common good. Courage, facing difficulties without retreat and speaking truth even when it's unwelcome. Self-discipline, governing my appetites and emotions rather than being governed by them. These virtues proved their worth in every crisis I faced. When the plague ravaged Rome, wealth couldn't stop the disease, but courage allowed me to remain in the city when others fled. Political connections couldn't end the suffering, but justice guided me in distributing resources fairly. Physical strength couldn't carry the burden of leadership, but self-discipline helped me make clear decisions despite exhaustion and grief. The beauty of virtue is that it grows stronger through use. Unlike material possessions that wear out or diminish when shared, character improves with practice. Every act of courage makes you more courageous. Every choice of justice strengthens your commitment to fairness. Every exercise of wisdom deepens your understanding. Every moment of self-discipline increases your freedom. I kept a simple reminder in my private chambers, a broken chain from a freed slave. It represented the truth that external circumstances, whether bonds of slavery or chains of gold, cannot touch what matters most about a human being. Character is the only true freedom. Virtue the only real wealth. This understanding transformed how I viewed my own position as emperor. The purple robes, the imperial crown, the vast palace, these were all indifferent things. They could enhance my ability to serve the common good, but they could never make me a better person. Only my daily choices could do that. Whether I was the most powerful man in the world or a simple citizen, the same opportunities for virtue were available to me. This perspective also changed how I treated others. I stopped being impressed by wealth or intimidated by poverty, stopped being swayed by flattery or crushed by criticism. Instead, I looked for character. A poor farmer who worked honestly impressed me more than a wealthy merchant who cheated his customers. A slave who served with dignity commanded more respect than a senator who schemed for personal advantage. The pursuit of virtue also provided a clear standard for every decision. When facing complex political situations, I would ask, what would wisdom counsel? What does justice require? How can I act with courage? What does self-discipline suggest? These questions cut through the confusion of competing interests and revealed the right path. Perhaps most importantly, virtue proved to be the only lasting source of satisfaction. External achievements brought temporary pleasure, but they always left me wanting more. Only acts of virtue, moments when I chose courage over comfort, justice over expedience, wisdom over popularity, provided lasting contentment. These choices built something permanent within me that no external force could diminish. This is the 8th Stoic secret. Build your life on virtue, because it's the only foundation that cannot be shaken. ****. In my private study, I kept astronomical charts from the Great Library of Alexandria, bay-tailed maps of the stars that had guided navigators across vast oceans and helped scholars calculate the movements of celestial bodies. But for me, these charts served a different purpose. They were instruments of philosophical practice, tools for what I came to call the view from above. Whenever the pressures of rule threatened to overwhelm me, when senators schemed against my policies, when barbarian incursions tested our defenses, when personal losses cut deep into my heart, I would unroll these star maps and practice a mental exercise that never failed to restore my perspective. I would imagine myself rising above the palace, above Rome, above Italy itself, higher and higher until the entire Roman Empire appeared as a small patch of land surrounded by vast territories, unknown to us, then higher still, until the whole earth became a pale dot, suspended in the infinite darkness of space. From that cosmic vantage point, the crisis that had seemed so overwhelming just moments before would reveal its true proportions. This wasn't an escape from responsibility. It was a return to clarity. From the view above, I could see patterns, invisible from ground level. The political controversy that had consumed weeks of Senate debates was just one moment in a larger story. The military campaign that had seemed like a matter of ultimate importance was just one of countless conflicts that had shaped human history and would continue long after I was forgotten. The exercise taught me that most of what we consider urgent is merely immediate. The angry letter from a provincial governor, the delayed shipment of grain to the capital, the unfavorable report from the Germanic frontier, all of these demanded attention, but none of them were as critical as they felt. In the moment, viewing them from above revealed their proper place in the larger scheme of things. I remember using this practice during one of the most difficult periods of my reign, when multiple crises converged simultaneously. The plague was claiming thousands of lives daily. Germanic tribes were pressing hard against our northern borders. A rebellion in the eastern provinces threatened to cut off vital trade routes. The treasury was strained nearly to breaking. My own health was deteriorating under the stress. From ground level, it felt like the empire was collapsing, like everything I had worked to preserve was crumbling. But when I practiced the view from above, I could see this as one challenging period in the long story of Rome, which had survived countless crises before and would likely face many more after I was gone. This wasn't the end of the world, it was just a difficult chapter in an ongoing story. The cosmic perspective also revealed the arbitrariness of what we typically consider important, the social distinctions that consumed so much energy in daily life. Who had been promoted, who had been slighted, who deserved more honor looked absurd from the vastness of space. What did it matter whether Senator Marcus held a higher position than Senator Lucius when viewed against the backdrop of eternity? This practice transformed my relationship with both success and failure. When military victories brought celebration and praise, the view from above reminded me that this triumph too was temporary and small in the cosmic scale. When defeats brought criticism and despair, the same perspective showed me that this setback was equally temporary and small. Both success and failure became simply events in the flow of time, rather than ultimate judgments on my worth. The view from above also taught me about the interconnectedness of all things. From ground level, it's easy to see ourselves as separate, competing individuals, fighting for limited resources. But from cosmic perspective, the boundaries between us and them dissolve. The Germanic tribes pressing against our borders weren't alien enemies. They were fellow human beings, trying to survive and thrive, just like Romans. The senators who opposed my policies weren't personal adversaries. They were people with different views about how to serve the common good. This understanding didn't eliminate the need to make difficult decisions or to defend Roman interests, but it allowed me to make those decisions with less personal animosity and more strategic clarity. When you see conflicts from above, you can respond to them more skillfully because you're not trapped in the emotional intensity of ground level perspective. I used this practice in my personal relationships as well. When my son Commodus disappointed me with his choices, I would imagine viewing our relationship from the stars. From that perspective, I could see him not as an extension of my expectations, but as an individual soul trying to find his own path through life. This didn't excuse poor choices, but it allowed me to respond with wisdom rather than wounded pride. The view from above became my refuge from the smallness that threatens every human life, the tendency to make our immediate concerns the center of the universe, to elevate our temporary problems to cosmic significance, to forget that we are tiny players in a vast and continuing story. This is the 9th Stoic secret. Regularly practice the view from above, and your problems will shrink to their proper size. **** Each morning, before the demands of empire could claim my attention, I would sit before an empty throne, a simple chair I kept in my private chambers for a practice that my advisors found disturbing, but that I found essential. I would imagine this throne occupied not by me, but by my successor, ruling over an empire from which I had permanently departed. This wasn't morbid fascination with death. It was what the Stoics call premeditatio malorum, the deliberate contemplation of loss as a path to appreciation and resilience. By regularly imagining the absence of what I valued most, I could experience its presence more fully and prepare myself mentally for the inevitable changes that life brings. I would visualize my death in detail, the final breath leaving my body, the immediate silence that would follow, the urgent discussions among my advisors about succession. I would imagine my funeral, the temporary grief of those who knew me, and then the gradual fading of my memory as new concerns occupied their attention. This wasn't self-torture, it was self-liberation. By fully accepting the reality of my mortality, I freed myself from the desperate clinging that makes life anxious and small. The practice extended beyond my own death to everything I cherished. I would imagine the palace empty and crumbling, Rome itself conquered by barbarians, the entire empire dissolved into competing kingdoms. I would visualize my remaining children dying before me, my closest friends betraying me, my health failing completely. Each imagined loss was painful, but the pain served a purpose. It revealed how precious these things were while I still had them. The empty throne exercise taught me something profound about human psychology. We adapt quickly to good fortune, taking it for granted until it becomes invisible. The luxury of the palace, the respect of the Senate, the security of Roman peace, of these extraordinary gifts became routine parts of my daily experience, as unremarkable as breathing. Only by imagining their absence could I see them clearly again. This practice transformed my relationship with everything I valued. When I sat down to dinner with my family, I would sometimes pause and imagine the table empty, the voices silent. Immediately, the conversation became more precious. The complaints that might have irritated me, my son's disinterest in philosophy, my daughter's concerns about social events, became opportunities for connection rather than sources of frustration. Negative visualization also proved invaluable in preparing for actual losses. When word came that my adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, had died unexpectedly during a military campaign, the grief was real and sharp, but it wasn't devastating. I had already imagined this possibility hundreds of times, had already worked through the emotions, had already accepted the reality that everyone I loved would eventually leave me or be left by me. The practice hadn't eliminated sorrow, but it had eliminated the shock and despair that often accompanies sudden loss. I applied this principle to imperial governance as well. I would regularly imagine worst-case scenarios: total military defeat, economic collapse, widespread rebellion, natural disasters. By mentally rehearsing these possibilities, I could prepare practical responses without waiting for crisis to force hurried decisions. When the Germanic tribes achieved their first major victory against our forces, I wasn't paralyzed by surprise because I had already considered this possibility and prepared contingency plans. The practice revealed how much of our suffering comes not from actual events, but from our resistance to the possibility of events. The senator who refuses to imagine losing his position lives in constant anxiety about threats to his status. The merchant who won't contemplate business failure makes poor decisions out of desperate optimism. The parent who cannot bear to think of losing a child becomes overprotective and anxious. By facing our fears deliberately and regularly, we rob them of their power to control us. Negative visualization also taught me gratitude in a way that positive thinking never could. It's easy to appreciate good health when you imagine being sick. Easy to value friendship when you imagine being alone. Easy to cherish peaceful times when you imagine being at war. The exercise didn't create pessimism, created realism that blossomed into deep appreciation for what actually exists. This is the 10th Stoic secret. Practice losing what you have in your mind so you can fully enjoy having it in reality. The Danube frontier in winter was no place for philosophical contemplation, or so my officers thought. We were camped in frozen mud, surrounded by hostile tribes, facing supply shortages and low morale. Every decision carried life or death consequences for thousands of men. Yet it was precisely in these moments of intense pressure that Stoic principles proved their worth most clearly. I kept a detailed journal during those campaigns, not of military tactics, but of decisions made under extreme stress. Each entry recorded not just what I decided, but how I decided, the process of applying virtue to action, when there was no time for lengthy deliberation and no room for error. The discipline of action, as I came to understand it, wasn't about acting quickly or decisively. It was about acting from principle rather than impulse, from wisdom rather than emotion, from virtue rather than expedience. In the chaos of military life, this discipline became my anchor. I remember one particularly brutal morning when scouts reported a large Germanic force moving toward our position. My generals immediately began debating whether to attack, retreat, or hold our ground. Each option carried significant risks. Attack might succeed, but could also result in catastrophic losses. Retreat might preserve our forces, but would abandon Allied settlements to massacre. Holding position might allow us to be surrounded and overwhelmed in the heated discussion that followed. I noticed how fear and pride were driving the debate rather than strategic thinking. Some officers wanted to attack because they couldn't bear the thought of appearing cowardly. Others wanted to retreat because they were terrified of responsibility for potential casualties. The decision was being made by emotion rather than wisdom. I called for silence and applied the disciplines I had practiced for years. First, what did justice require? We had obligations to our Allied settlements, to our soldiers, and to Rome itself. Justice demanded that we consider all these responsibilities equally, not favor one at the expense of others. Second, what did courage counsel? True courage wasn't reckless aggression or defensive timidity, was calculated action in service of what was right. Third, what did wisdom suggest? The best available information, honestly assessed, pointed toward a specific tactical approach. Fourth, what did self-discipline demand? That I act from principle rather than react from fear or pride. The decision became clear, a strategic withdrawal to better defensive ground, coordinated with a flanking maneuver designed to protect the Allied settlements. It wasn't the most heroic option or the safest one, but it was the most virtuous, the choice that best balanced all our obligations and made the best use of our available resources. This process became my template for every significant decision, whether military or civilian. The discipline of action required me to pause, even in urgent situations, to ensure my choices flowed from virtue rather than impulse. Sometimes this pause lasted only seconds, but it made the difference between wise action and mere reaction. Back in Rome, I applied the same discipline to political decisions. When the Senate proposed legislation that would benefit wealthy landowners at the expense of poor citizens, the immediate political calculation suggested compromise. Opposing the measure would create powerful enemies. Supporting it would maintain useful alliances. But when I applied the discipline of action, the choice was clear. Justice required protecting the vulnerable, regardless of political consequences. The discipline also governed my personal relationships. When my son, Commodus, disappointed me with his choices, my immediate impulse was to lecture him about responsibility and philosophy. But the discipline of action required me to consider what approach would actually serve his development. Sometimes that meant difficult conversations. Sometimes it meant patient silence. Always it meant responding from love and wisdom, rather than reacting from frustration and wounded pride. I learned that virtuous action often looks different from what people expect. When citizens demanded harsh punishment for captured barbarian leaders, justice actually required mercy that might lead to negotiated peace. When senators expected me to indulge in the luxury befitting an emperor, self-discipline required simplicity that might inspire better governance. When military traditions called for brutal retaliation, wisdom suggested strategic restraint that might prevent future conflicts. The discipline of action also taught me about the relationship between character and effectiveness. Officers who made decisions from ego often achieved short-term victories that created long-term problems. Politicians who acted from personal ambition often gained immediate advantages that ultimately weakened their position. Citizens who pursued immediate pleasure often created future suffering for themselves and others. But those who consistently acted from virtue, even when it cost them immediate benefits, built something more valuable than temporary success. They built character that became a reliable source of good judgment. They built trust that became a foundation for lasting influence. They built integrity that remained unshaken regardless of external circumstances. The most profound aspect of this discipline was its cumulative effect. Each virtuous action made the next one easier. Each choice of courage strengthened my ability to be courageous. Each decision based on justice deepened my commitment to fairness. Each moment of self-discipline increased my freedom from destructive impulses. This is the 11th Stoic secret. Let virtue guide your actions, and you'll build unshakable character while serving the common good. Senator Gaius Avidius was the most insufferable man in the Roman Senate. He opposed every policy I proposed, not from principle but from spite. He spread rumors about my fitness to rule, questioned my military decisions in public forums, and seemed to take personal pleasure in creating obstacles to effective governance. For years, he was the thorn in my side that no amount of patience could remove. I kept his most vicious letter in my private desk, not as a reminder of his cruelty, but as a teacher of Stoic wisdom. In it, he accused me of weakness, incompetence, and betrayal of Roman values. The words were calculated to wound, and they succeeded. My initial reaction was rage, followed by a desire for retaliation that surprised me with its intensity. But as I sat with that letter, studying my own emotional response, I began to understand something profound about human nature and the art of dealing with difficult people. Gaius wasn't attacking me. He was revealing himself. His anger and hostility were symptoms of his own inner turmoil, not accurate assessments of my character. This realization transformed everything. When someone treats you badly, they're not telling you who you are, they're showing you who they are. Their behavior springs from their own fears, frustrations, and unresolved conflicts. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does free you from taking it personally. I began to see Gaius differently. Behind his attacks, I could perceive a man who felt powerless and insignificant. His criticism of my policies often revealed genuine concerns about the empire's direction, even when expressed through personal insults. His hostility toward my philosophical interests reflected his own fear that traditional Roman values were being abandoned. His attempts to undermine my authority came from his desperate need to feel important and influential. This understanding changed how I responded to him. Instead of defending myself against his attacks, I began listening for the legitimate concerns beneath his hostility. Instead of viewing him as an enemy to be defeated, I began seeing him as a fellow Roman struggling with difficult times in imperfect ways. This didn't mean accepting his behavior unchallenged, but it did mean responding with wisdom rather than reacting with emotion. The transformation in our relationship was gradual but remarkable. When I stopped being defensive, he had less to attack. When I acknowledged the valid points hidden in his criticism, he became less vitriolic in his opposition. When I treated him with the respect due to any senator, regardless of his treatment of me, he began to reciprocate that courtesy. This approach worked with other difficult people as well. The provincial governor, who constantly complained about resource allocation, was actually struggling with impossible demands from Rome. The military commander, who questioned my strategic decisions, was genuinely concerned about his soldiers' welfare. The citizen who protested every imperial edict was expressing legitimate fears about how changes would affect his family. I learned to separate the message from the messenger, the concern from the complaint, the need from the nastiness. People often express valid points through invalid methods. They may be right about the problem even when they're wrong about the solution. They may have legitimate grievances even when they express them through illegitimate means. This perspective also helped me understand my own difficult moments. When I found myself being short-tempered with servants or impatient with advisors, I could recognize these as symptoms of my own stress and fatigue rather than accurate judgments about their competence. When I felt frustrated with slow progress on imperial projects, I could see this as my own struggle with accepting what I couldn't control rather than evidence that others weren't working hard enough. The Stoic approach to difficult people isn't passive acceptance of abuse. It's strategic understanding that allows for more effective response. When you understand that hostile behavior usually springs from pain or fear, you can address the underlying cause rather than just react to the surface symptoms. Sometimes this meant setting clear boundaries. Gaius could express his concerns about policy, but personal attacks on my character would not be tolerated in formal Senate sessions. Sometimes it meant offering assistance. The complaining governor needed additional resources or more realistic expectations from Rome. Sometimes it meant patient persistence. The protesting citizen needed time and evidence to understand how changes would actually benefit his community. The most challenging application came with my own family. My son Commodus was increasingly difficult as he grew older. Rejecting my values and gravitating toward pursuits I found troubling. My initial impulse was to force him toward philosophy and responsible governance through lectures and restrictions. But applying Stoic wisdom, I realized his rebellion was partly natural development and partly reaction to the pressure of being my son. Instead of fighting his nature, I began working with it. Instead of demanding that he become a philosopher, I focused on helping him become an honorable man in whatever role he chose. This didn't eliminate all our conflicts, but it reduced the bitterness and maintained our relationship through difficult years. This is the 12th Stoic secret. Difficult people are usually suffering people respond to their pain, not their behavior. In the gladiatorial training grounds near Rome, I once picked up a broken sword weapon that had snapped during combat, its jagged edge rendering it seemingly useless. The gladiator who had wielded it was preparing to discard it when I asked if I might examine it more closely. What I saw in that broken blade became a perfect metaphor for the most transformative Stoic practice, the discipline of perception. The gladiator saw only a ruined weapon, worthless and disappointing. But as I turned the broken sword in my hands, I saw something different. The break had created a new kind of tool, one that could be used for detailed carving, for cutting rope, for tasks that an intact sword could never perform. The failure had created new possibilities that didn't exist before. This is the essence of the discipline of perception. Events themselves are neutral, but our judgments about events determine whether they become sources of suffering or opportunities for growth. The broken sword was neither good nor bad. It simply was. Whether it became useless trash or useful tool depended entirely on how we chose to see it. I began applying this principle to every setback and challenge in my reign. When the Antonine Plague devastated the empire, my initial perception was of unmitigated disaster, death, economic collapse, social chaos. But when I disciplined my perception, I could see other aspects of the same event, opportunities to demonstrate effective leadership under pressure, chances to identify and fix weaknesses in our public health systems, moments when the best aspects of human nature emerged through mutual aid and sacrifice. The plague was still a tragedy, but it was also a teacher. The same event that brought suffering also brought wisdom, compassion, and institutional improvements that served the empire for generations. Whether I focused on the tragedy or the teaching determined whether the experience destroyed me or strengthened me. This discipline proved essential during the Germanic campaigns. When our forces suffered their first major defeat, the obvious perception was of military failure and personal humiliation. My officers were demoralized, my enemies emboldened, my reputation damaged. These were all factual consequences, but they weren't the only way to perceive the situation. I chose to see the defeat as valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and our own weaknesses. It revealed flaws in our tactical assumptions that could be corrected. It identified which officers could maintain their composure under pressure and which needed additional training. It showed our enemies strategic thinking, helping us anticipate their future moves. The same defeat that looked like disaster from one angle became education from another. The discipline of perception also transformed my understanding of criticism and praise. When senators attacked my policies, my natural perception was of personal rejection and political opposition. But with disciplined perception, I could see their criticism as information about how my ideas were being received and understood. Even unfair attacks often contained kernels of truth about communication failures or unintended consequences. Similarly, when citizens praised my leadership, my initial perception was of validation and success. But disciplined perception revealed the dangers hidden in praise, the temptation toward complacency, the risk of believing my own propaganda, the tendency to repeat strategies that had worked in the past even when circumstances had changed. Learned to perceive both criticism and praise as simply information rather than judgments about my worth. This freed me to learn from both without being emotionally destabilized by either. Personal losses became opportunities to practice this discipline in its most challenging form. When my children died, the natural perception was of meaningless tragedy and divine cruelty. The pain was real and sharp, but the interpretation of that pain was up to me. I could perceive these deaths as evidence that life was meaningless and love was futile, or I could perceive them as reminders of life's precious fragility and love's profound value. I chose to see each loss as a teacher in the art of loving fully while holding lightly. My children's deaths didn't prove that love was pointless, proved that love was so valuable it was worth experiencing even when it led to grief. The pain became not evidence of cosmic injustice, but proof of human connection. The discipline of perception revealed that we live in the stories we tell ourselves about events, not in the events themselves. Two people can experience identical circumstances and have completely different lives based on the perceptions they choose. The person who perceives setbacks as evidence of personal inadequacy lives in a world of constant self-doubt. The person who perceives setbacks as training for resilience lives in a world of continuous growth. This understanding gave me tremendous power over my own experience. I couldn't control what happened to me, but I could control what I made it mean. Every obstacle could become training for patience. Every betrayal could become education in human nature. Every loss could become instruction in what truly mattered. The broken sword remained on my desk throughout my reign, a daily reminder that perception shapes reality. What appears to be destruction might be renovation. What seems like ending might be beginning. What looks like failure might be redirection towards something better. This is the 13th Stoic secret. Master your perceptions, and you master your experience of life. Asterisk, asterisk, on my desk sat an hourglass filled with sand from the shores of Alexandria, gift from Egyptian scholars that became my most trusted advisor. I would watch the grains fall, grain by grain, each one representing a moment of my life that could never be recovered. This wasn't a morbid fascination, but a practice in the most liberating truth I ever learned. The profound power of accepting impermanence. Everything changes. Everything ends. Everything passes away. These aren't tragic facts about existence. They're the fundamental conditions that make existence beautiful and meaningful. The hourglass taught me that trying to stop time is like trying to hold water. In cupped hands, the tighter you grip, the faster it escapes. I learned this lesson first through the small changes that daily life brings. The young senator who seemed so promising gradually revealed his corruption. The loyal general who had served faithfully for decades began showing signs of advancing age. The garden I had carefully cultivated was transformed each season by growth, death, and renewal. Nothing remained exactly as it was, not for a day, not for an hour. Fighting against this reality had brought me nothing but suffering in my early years as emperor. I would rage when trusted advisors changed their opinions, when carefully planned policies produced unexpected results, when relationships evolved in directions I hadn't anticipated. I was trying to build a static world in a universe defined by constant motion. The hourglass taught me to work with change rather than against it. Instead of demanding that people remain exactly as they were when I first knew them, I began appreciating who they were becoming. Instead of insisting that successful policies continue working in identical ways forever, I started adapting them to changing circumstances. Instead of expecting my own abilities and perspectives to remain fixed, I embraced the growth and evolution that time brought. This acceptance of impermanence transformed my relationship with both success and failure. When military victories brought temporary glory, I didn't cling to them as permanent achievements or expect them to guarantee future success. When political setbacks brought temporary disgrace, I didn't despair as though they represented permanent defeat. Both triumph and disaster were simply moments in the continuous flow of time, each one passing away to make room for whatever came next. The most profound application came in facing my own mortality. In my younger years, I had lived with the unconscious assumption that I had unlimited time to accomplish everything I wanted to do. This illusion created procrastination, anxiety, and a sense that important things could always be delayed. The hourglass cured me of this fantasy. Once I truly accepted that my time was limited, not just theoretically, but visceral, every day became precious. Every conversation with my children became an opportunity that might not come again. Every chance to serve the common good became urgent rather than routine. Every moment of peace became something to savor rather than take for granted. Paradoxically, accepting the brevity of life made me less anxious about time, not more. When you know that everything is temporary, you stop wasting energy trying to make temporary things permanent. You stop demanding guarantees about uncertain futures. You start focusing completely on making the present moment as meaningful as possible. I began measuring time not by duration, but by depth. A brief conversation that created genuine connection was more valuable than hours of empty ceremony. A single decision made from wisdom and virtue mattered more than days of busy but meaningless activity. A moment of true understanding was worth more than years of accumulated facts. The hourglass also taught me about legacy in a way that transformed how I approached leadership. Since my time was limited, what I built had to be designed to outlast me. Instead of creating systems that depended on my personal involvement, I focused on establishing principles and institutions that could function independently. Instead of making myself indispensable, I tried to make myself unnecessary by developing others who could carry important work forward. This perspective changed how I dealt with the urgent versus the important. Many things that seemed urgent, responding immediately to every critic, attending every ceremony, micromanaging every detail, were actually just noise that distracted from what truly mattered. The important things, establishing just laws, developing capable leaders, strengthening institutions, building character, could rarely be rushed but always deserved priority. I learned to distinguish between being busy and being productive, between activity and achievement, between motion and progress. The hourglass reminded me that time spent on trivial matters was time stolen from meaningful work. Every grain of sand that fell while I was distracted by unimportant things was gone forever. The practice of watching time pass also cultivated what I can only call temporal humility. My problems, however pressing they felt, were temporary. My achievements, however significant they seemed, would eventually be forgotten. My reign, however eventful it appeared, was just one brief chapter in the long story of human civilization. This wasn't depressing, it was liberating. It freed me from the crushing weight of trying to solve every problem perfectly, and allowed me to focus on doing my best with the time and circumstances I had been given. This is the 14th Stoic secret: embrace impermanence, and you'll discover the eternal value hidden in each fleeting moment. Asterisk, asterisk. Carved into the marble above the entrance to the Roman Forum were words I had commissioned in my 5th year as emperor. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. These weren't merely decorative sentiments. They represented the most challenging aspect of Stoic philosophy, balancing personal inner peace with active service to the human community. In my early philosophical studies, I had been drawn to the idea of the sage who achieved perfect tranquility through detachment from worldly affairs. The image was appealing: a wise man sitting in serene contemplation, undisturbed by the chaos and conflict that plague ordinary human existence. But as emperor, I learned that true stoicism isn't an escape from social responsibility, it's a foundation for deeper engagement with it. The inscription reminded me daily that no human being is an island. My personal virtue was meaningless if it didn't contribute to the common good. My inner peace was selfish if it didn't help me serve others more effectively. My philosophical understanding was incomplete if it didn't guide me toward actions that benefited the human community. This realization transformed how I approached every aspect of governance. When making decisions about taxation, I couldn't think only of imperial revenue, had to consider how policies would affect the farmer in Gaul, the merchant in Egypt, the soldier on the frontier. When choosing between competing priorities, I couldn't focus solely on what would enhance my own reputation. I had to ask what would best serve the 60 million people whose welfare depended on wise leadership. The social dimension of Stoicism also changed how I understood virtue itself. Courage wasn't just personal bravery in facing my own challenges. It was the willingness to make unpopular decisions when they served the greater good. Justice wasn't just fairness in my personal relationships. It was creating systems that protected the weak and held the powerful accountable. Wisdom wasn't just understanding philosophical principles, was applying those principles to complex social problems. Self-discipline wasn't just controlling my own appetites, was modeling the kind of behavior that inspired others toward their own virtue. I learned that individual virtue and social responsibility weren't competing demands, but complementary aspects of the same commitment. The more centered I became in my own character, the more energy I had for serving others. The more clearly I understood Stoic principles, the better I could apply them to public policy. The more peace I found within myself, the more effectively I could work for peace in the empire. This understanding guided my approach to economic policy. When senators proposed legislation that would benefit wealthy landowners at the expense of poor citizens, I had to balance respect for property rights with concern for social justice. The Stoic principle that we are all members of one human community meant that policies creating extreme inequality violated our fundamental intercon necessity. It shaped my military decisions as well. When Germanic tribes raided our borders, the immediate response was always military retaliation. But the social dimension of Stoicism required me to ask deeper questions. What conditions had driven these tribes to desperate measures? How could Roman policy address underlying causes rather than just symptoms? How could military action serve the long-term good of all peoples, not just immediate Roman interests? The most challenging application came in dealing with slavery, an institution so embedded in Roman society that questioning it seemed unthinkable to most citizens. Yet Stoic philosophy taught that all humans possess the capacity for virtue and wisdom, regardless of their social status. The slave in my kitchen and the senator in my council both had immortal souls capable of wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. I couldn't eliminate slavery. The economic and social disruption would have been catastrophic, but I could use imperial influence to improve slaves' treatment, expand opportunities for freedom, and gradually shift cultural attitudes toward recognizing the fundamental dignity of every human being. Change had to be gradual and systematic, rather than sudden and disruptive, but it had to move consistently toward greater justice. The social dimension also required balancing competing goods rather than choosing between good and evil. Resources devoted to military defense couldn't be spent on public works. Time invested in governing couldn't be devoted to philosophical study. Attention given to imperial duties meant less attention for family relationships. The art was finding the right balance rather than pretending these tensions didn't exist. I learned to see myself not as a separate individual who happened to have social responsibilities, but as a part of a larger organism whose health depended on all parts functioning properly. Just as my hand serves my body's well-being, rather than its own narrow interests, I needed to serve the community's well-being, even when it required personal sacrifice. This perspective transformed difficult decisions from personal burdens into opportunities for service. When I had to choose between popular policies and just policies, the social dimension of Stoicism made the choice clear. My job was to serve the common good, not to win approval. When I had to balance competing regional interests, the principle of human interconnectedness guided me toward solutions that considered everyone's legitimate needs. This is the 15th Stoic secret. Your personal virtue is complete only when it serves the human community we all share. Asterisk, asterisk, each dawn, before the first servant stirred or the first petition arrived, I would unroll a simple scroll in my private chambers, my morning prayer, though it contained no appeals to the gods, but rather reminders to myself. This daily ritual became the foundation of everything else I accomplished, a practice so powerful that I believe anyone can transform their life by adopting similar disciplines. The scroll contained questions. I asked myself every morning, what can I do today to serve the common good? What challenges will likely arise? And how can I respond with virtue? What am I grateful for that I took for granted yesterday? How will I practice wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline in the coming hours? These weren't abstract philosophical exercises. They were practical preparations for living. After reflecting on these questions, I would spend several minutes in what I called morning fortification, deliberately imagining the difficulties the day might bring and rehearsing virtuous responses. If senators would likely oppose my legislative proposals, how could I respond with patience rather than frustration? If reports arrived of military setbacks, how could I maintain clear thinking rather than emotional reaction? If personal disappointments arose, how could I practice acceptance rather than resistance? This mental rehearsal proved invaluable throughout my reign. When actual challenges arose, I had already considered how to handle them virtuously. Instead of being caught off guard and reacting impulsively, I could respond from prepared principles. The practice didn't eliminate difficulties, but it ensured that I met them from strength rather than surprise. The evening brought a complementary practice, detailed review of the day's events. I would ask myself, where did I act from virtue today? Where did I fall short of my principles? What did I learn about myself, about others, about effective action? How can I do better tomorrow? This wasn't self-criticism, but self-strengthening. Like a craftsman examining his work to improve his skill. I kept a daily journal of these reflections, what became my meditations, not for publication, but for practice. Writing forced me to think clearly about experiences that might otherwise pass by unexamined. The act of putting thoughts into words revealed assumptions I hadn't noticed, patterns I needed to change, and insights I wanted to remember. Between morning preparation and evening review, I practiced what I called philosophical moments, brief pauses throughout the day to apply Stoic principles to immediate situations. When someone criticized my policies, I would pause and ask, is there truth here I can learn from? When unexpected delays frustrated my schedule, I would remind myself, this is not up to me. My response is up to me. When good news arrived, I would practice gratitude while remembering that fortune could change. These philosophical moments lasted only seconds, but they kept me connected to principles that might otherwise be forgotten in the rush of daily business. They were like anchor points that prevented me from drifting away from virtue under pressure. I also developed specific practices for the 4 cardinal virtues. For wisdom, I committed to reading philosophy for at least 1 hour each day, regardless of other demands. The empire's business could wait. The emperor's character could not. I would also seek counsel from advisors who were wiser than I was, remembering that true wisdom recognizes its own limitations. For justice, I established regular audiences where any citizen could bring concerns directly to me, bypassing the usual bureaucratic filters. I also made decisions based on what served the common good, rather than what enhanced my personal popularity. Justice required the courage to disappoint some people in order to serve everyone fairly. For courage, I practiced small acts of bravery, daily speaking truth when it was unwelcome, making difficult decisions promptly, facing uncomfortable realities rather than avoiding them. Physical courage on the battlefield was easier than moral courage in political situations, but both required regular exercise. For self-discipline, I maintained simple habits that reinforced my control over appetites and impulses. I ate plain food, even when elaborate banquets were available. I walked or rode horses for transportation when I could have been carried in luxury. I chose simple clothing over imperial finery whenever possible. These weren't dramatic gestures, but daily reminders that I controlled my desires rather than being controlled by them. The most powerful practice was what I called cosmic perspective, regularly stepping back to view immediate concerns from the broader context of time and space. When political controversies consumed the Senate's attention, I would remind myself that similar debates had occurred for centuries and would continue long after I was forgotten. This didn't make current issues unimportant, but it prevented them from becoming overwhelming. I also practiced deliberate gratitude, taking time each day to notice and appreciate things I normally took for granted: the loyalty of good servants, the beauty of sunrise over Rome, the gift of health, the privilege of serving in meaningful work. Gratitude wasn't just a pleasant emotion. It was a discipline that protected me from the constant wanting that makes life miserable. These practices worked because they were simple, consistent, and practical. They didn't require special equipment, extended retreats, or complex rituals. They could be adapted to any lifestyle or schedule. Most importantly, they created gradual but lasting changes in character through the accumulated effect of small, daily choices: the scroll, the journal, the philosophical moments, the virtue practices, the cosmic perspective, the deliberate gratitude. These became the architecture of a philosophical life. They transformed abstract principles into practical wisdom, theoretical knowledge into applied virtue, intellectual understanding into character strength. This is the 16th Stoic secret. Transformation comes through daily practices that gradually build unshakable character. Asterisk, asterisk, as I write these final words, my hands shake not from fear, but from the physical weakness that comes with age and illness. The stomach pains that have plagued my later years remind me daily that this body is temporary, but the principles I have shared with you are eternal. What I have learned about inner strength through decades of applying Stoic wisdom to the challenges of ruling an empire can serve you in whatever role life has given you. The last entry in my personal meditations, written just days before my death, contained this reflection: you came from nothing and will return to nothing. What have you lost? The question isn't rhetorical, it's practical. When you truly understand that everything external is temporary, you stop clinging desperately to things you cannot keep and start building something that can never be taken from you: character. Every secret I have shared with you points toward the same fundamental truth: happiness and peace come from within, not from external circumstances. The emperor's palace and the common citizen's home both contain the same opportunity for virtue, the same chance for wisdom, the same possibility of inner strength. Your circumstances are different from mine, but your capacity for philosophy is identical. The senator who betrayed me, the plagues that devastated the empire, the children I buried, the critics who questioned my every decision, all of these taught me that external events have only the power over us that we give them. They can hurt our bodies, damage our reputations, frustrate our plans, and break our hearts. But they cannot touch what the Stoics call the ruling faculty, that part of you that chooses how to respond to whatever happens. This is why these secrets are so dangerous to those who profit from your anxiety and desperation. When you realize that your peace of mind doesn't depend on having more money, you stop being controlled by those who promise wealth. When you understand that your self-worth doesn't depend on others' approval, you stop being manipulated by those who offer acceptance in exchange for compliance. When you know that your happiness doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, you stop being paralyzed by those who sell fear of an uncertain future. They don't want you to know that you already possess everything you need for a meaningful life. They don't want you to discover that virtue costs nothing but brings everything worthwhile. They don't want you to realize that inner strength makes you uncontrollable by anyone who profits from your weakness. The practices I have shared: reflection, evening review, the discipline of desire, negative visualization, the view from above, acceptance of impermanence. These are tools for building a fortress of the soul that no external force can breach. They work not because they are mystical or complex, but because they align your daily choices with reality rather than illusion. Start small. Choose one practice and commit to it for 30 days. Notice how it changes not just your thoughts, but your responses to stress, disappointment, and uncertainty. Build gradually rather than attempting dramatic transformation overnight. Character develops through consistent small choices, not through sporadic heroic efforts. Remember that setbacks are not failures, but training. Every time you fall short of your principles, you have an opportunity to practice getting back up. Every time circumstances challenge your peace of mind, you have a chance to strengthen your inner citadel. Every time others disappoint you, you have a moment to practice responding from virtue rather than reacting from emotion. The compound effect of these daily practices will surprise you. Small improvements in how you handle criticism will gradually build unshakable confidence. Minor increases in your acceptance of things you cannot control will eventually create profound peace. Tiny daily choices of virtue over convenience will slowly construct character that becomes a source of strength for yourself and inspiration for others. Most importantly, remember that this philosophy is not about becoming emotionless or indifferent. Stoicism is about becoming fully human, feeling deeply while thinking clearly, caring passionately while accepting wisely, engaging completely while holding lightly. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to ensure that virtue guides emotion rather than emotion overwhelming virtue. As my own time draws to an end, I am filled not with regret about what I failed to accomplish, but with gratitude for what I was privileged to learn. The empire I leave behind will face new challenges that will require new solutions, but the principles that sustained me through every crisis will remain as relevant for future generations as they were for ancient Romans. You live in a different time, face different challenges, hold different responsibilities, but you confront the same fundamental choice that every human being has faced since consciousness began. Will you build your life on things that can be taken from you, or on the one thing that remains yours, regardless of circumstances, your character? The Stoic secrets I have shared point toward a single, ultimate secret. You are already strong enough, wise enough, and good enough to live with dignity and purpose, whatever your circumstances. You don't need perfect health, unlimited wealth, universal approval, or guaranteed success. You need only the courage to practice virtue consistently and the wisdom to focus on what is truly up to you. My challenge to you is simple. Take these timeless truths and make them part of your daily life. Don't just study them, live them. Don't just understand them, practice them. Don't just admire them, embody them. The world needs people who cannot be broken by external pressure, who respond to hatred with wisdom, who meet uncertainty with courage, who face loss with dignity. The world needs modern Stoics who prove that inner strength is not only possible, but practical. This is my final gift to you. The knowledge that you possess everything necessary for an unshakable life. Use it well.